Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining in today's webinar. Today's webinar will be hosted by Christian Minder, our head of customer support. Along with Christian, I'll be also talking a little bit about ClicData. Myself, I'm Sri Neve. First things first, you just want to make sure the video and audio is working right for everyone. If you have any issues with the video or audio, you do have a chat box on the panel, which you can type in and you can let us know so we can get that corrected for you. The webinar is going to be recorded and it will be available on our website and YouTube channel at the end. During the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to post them on our chat channel and we can answer the questions at the end. Today's webinar is for business managers who are unfamiliar to the Net Promoter Score. Christian Minder is going to talk a little bit about the Net Promoter Score and how you could use ClicData to measure the Net Promoter Score for your organization. We're going to talk about collecting the right data, the different ways of utilizing NPS. So Christian will talk about the best ways of utilizing the data that you're collecting through your surveys. And ultimately, we'll be showcasing how the NPS and related KPIs can be showcased on ClicData's dashboarding tool. For today's agenda, we will talk a bit about ClicData, what is NPS, how the NPS can be significant to your business growth, the data collection related to NPS, and reporting NPS on ClicData. ClicData is world's first cloud-based BI platform. We are 100% cloud-based. We started in 2009. Today, we have more than 1 million KPIs being managed on ClicData, and we have more than 100,000 dashboards being published every hour. We have received 4.6 out of 5-star rating, and we have a 97% recommendation rate on Capterra. ClicData itself is an end-to-end tool. To put it in a nutshell, we can talk about ClicData in 4 simple steps. We do everything from connecting and automating your data sets. We connect to more than 200 plus data sources, so we can get the data from anywhere. We have an ETL layer on top of your data sets so that you can cleanse your data, you can run calculations on top of your data, you can enhance your data. Finally, it's our visualization layer on top of that. We have more than 50 different visualization objects that you could use to create an interactive and automated dashboard. And at the end of it, you want to be able to share this information with your peers, with internal and external users. And we have an entire model where you can automate and share this dashboard with your team or your customers. So I'm going to hand it over to Christian. Christian is going to start talking about what is the Net Promoter Score, and I'm going to introduce you to the elements of how to use it and how to use ClicData for your NPS tracking.
Thank you, Sri. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank all of you who have joined today's webinar. Just to introduce myself here personally, my name is Christian Mindo, one of the product specialists here at ClicData, and as well as the head of customer support. You may or may not have been in contact with me in the past, depending on whether you've contacted us through our support channels. But for those who have, hope you've been well. For those who haven't, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. And so to start off today's topic on Net Promoter Score, abbreviated by NPS, is defined as a way to quickly measure how satisfied your customers are with your product or service. And so what makes this KPI more unique than traditional KPIs is that it's an external measure purely driven by customer feedback. So customer feedback, or with customer feedback, they'll tell you, what's working or what's not working with your product or service. And with that information, you can make the right adjustments as a business owner, particularly maintaining the good aspects from what customers are telling you, and as well as tweaking or completely overhauling the bad aspects. And so with the right adjustments, hopefully that will sort of tear down any obstacles that are preventing you from scaling your business even further. And just a quick fact on the bottom right of my slide, it states that businesses that have a high NPS score tend to grow more rapidly than their competitors. Okay, so to sort of start off the implementation of NPS itself, you must construct a survey in order to get that customer feedback. Without that customer feedback as data, there is no reporting or NPS as well. And so when constructing the survey, it's important that you must include the one question that relates to NPS. And that question states, quote unquote, how likely are you to recommend insert, your product or service name here to a friend or a colleague? So you most likely have seen this question in the past, whether you're shopping on Amazon or you're dining at a restaurant, or you probably have seen this question when a transaction has been fulfilled. And so many of you probably think this question is trivial, but for those who actually do respond, that particular business is most likely making those adjustments according to the feedback, and hope that they scale even further. And so for this webinar, we will be focusing on a 10-star scale. However, it doesn't really matter what scale you choose. You can choose a 3-star scale, a 5-star scale. But at the end of the day, the truth will unfold through the customer feedback. And so that is the most important thing. And so that's this question here is not the only question that you need to ask on your survey. Of course, in fact, it's actually an opportunity to get customer feedback on particular aspects of your product or service. Maybe some examples could be quality or the speed or timeliness. And so these are not included in the NPS calculation itself, but they are indicative of what aspects could be improved moving forward. And then the last thing, and which I'd argue is probably the most important, is some sort of free-form text on your survey. And the reason this is because this allows customers to convey their true feelings to the product or service. And they will provide reasonings as to why they provided such ratings. And so not only do you know what is lacking or what needs to be improved, but how do you improve that? And so that's knowing that how is definitely a sort of a head start over your competition. And then at the bottom here, I provided some example survey applications. We as ClicData, we personally recommend either SurveyMonkey or Google Forms. And the reason being is because we natively integrate with those applications. However, if you've already conducted surveys on NPS or just surveys in general using another application, maybe FormStack or Typeform, but not limited to those two applications, ClicData can still integrate with it using our web service connector, where you'd need to interact with that application's API. Though it's a more technical process, it is still possible nonetheless. So moving on, I'm just going to quickly talk about how NPS responses are classified and as well as the calculation as well. So to start off, we do have the promoters. And so these are respondents that respond with either a 9 or a 10 to the NPS question. And so typically with promoters, they will tell you how much they love the product, and may or may not provide minor feedback on potential improvements that can be made. So something to be mindful of here is what they love about your product. And so those are key aspects that you would most likely want to maintain moving forward. And then we have the passives. These are respondents who respond with either a 7 or an 8. And typically passives feel indifferent about your product. They don't love it or dislike it by any means. And most likely they will tell you some minor feedback, maybe some major things. But it's important to be mindful of their feedback as well. Then lastly, we have the detractors, respondents who respond with a 6-star or below. And typically with detractors, they are dissatisfied with your product or service, and they generally provide major feedback on what to improve moving forward. And then we have the NPS calculation itself. And so the way to calculate it is to take the percentage of the promoters. So that would be the count of promoters divided by the count of respondents multiplied by 100. And then you subtract that by the percentage of detractors, which of course is the count of detractors divided by the count of respondents. And so that will give you your NPS score. Okay, so now we're going to sort of jump to the implementation on ClicData section. And so the first thing to do always is to get that data into your ClicData account. Of course, without data, there are no dashboards. And so For this example here, I've provided a generated data source. You will see that this schema is identical to SurveyMonkey. So if you have SurveyMonkey and you've imported SurveyMonkey data in the past, most likely you'll notice that this data here resembles that of SurveyMonkey. And so just to talk about a couple of key columns in this data source, one would be the date. And while it's not used in the NPS calculation, of course, you can use the date column to drill down on particular timeframes. And then the 4 columns on the right, we do have quality, speed, recommend, which is the NPS question, and as well as feedback. And so those 4 columns will be used on ClicData in the dashboard component, which I'll get to right now. And so for reporting on ClicData, we are going to cover some examples on what you can do using our widget selections. And the first example I have here is creating NPS through indicator widgets. So indicator widgets being a number indicator, circular gauge, a bullet chart, etc. So we have plenty of indicator widgets that are capable of displaying NPS, and it's just a matter of what visualization sort of intrigues you the most. And so for my example here, I have used number indicators and a bullet chart to display the NPS. But to sort of go into detail here, I needed to create the counts of the respondents, the promoters, the passives, and the detractors through number indicators. And as you can see at the bottom there, I showed a filter example of how you would implement a filter to calculate for promoters. Of course, when you are transposing this for passives and detractors, just be sure to change out that filter accordingly. And just before moving to the next step, I am using a distinct count on the response ID column. In terms of performing a count on the respondents and classifying them, it shouldn't matter what column you use. It's just, I just found that distinct count on the response ID did give me the right numbers. The next step is to use a formula-based bullet chart to calculate NPS. And so some of you may be confused as to what a formula-based widget is. But when you create a widget, you will have the option in its properties to switch it from a data-based widget, which looks to your data source to aggregate data accordingly. And then the other option is a formula where you can write a formula to calculate whatever value you're looking to do. In this case, I opted to use a formula-based bullet chart because I have values on my dashboard currently, which are the ones number indicators in step 1. And so what I've done is I've used the widget function so I can reference those values directly and then perform the NPS calculation accordingly. And so what that yielded me as a result was 81.8, which is a very high number. And, that tells me that, we are in good standing. Of course, improvements can always be made moving forward. The next example I have here is displaying NPS according to some sort of grouping. In this case, I chose to do a time frame. So it's, in a sense, my date column. This KPI is a bit more technical than the first step, but you will notice that it does take some elements from that first step onto here as well. But the first thing to do is to create calculated columns for each count. So we have the promoters, the detractors, the responses, and then calculate NPS using those calculated columns. For this KPI, I opted to use Transact SQL. And so maybe just to go a little off topic here, most of you are familiar with our data functions such as data aggregate, the data distinct, etc. While it is still possible to use those functions here. It does require a bit more mapping, and I would say it is less robust and compared to Transact SQL, that is. And so with Transact SQL, you can write a simple case statement that is dynamic according to your grouping column, in which case I used that case statement for promoters, for example, where I say, if the recommended score is greater or equal to 9, then I want to count for it, which I use a 1 for, and then else 0, and then end that statement. And then same thing for detractors, of course, changing that criteria And then for responses, you actually don't need to use a calculated column. What you can actually do is just drag and drop that column and then aggregate it by distinct count, as I've done in the previous step. So once those columns are dragged in, of course, you create a third calculated column, but a fourth column in general, which will calculate the NPS score. And instead of using the widget function, because we're not referencing widgets outside of this chart, in fact, we are referencing values within the chart itself. So we would use the series value function instead. And of course, you will notice that it does resemble the NPS formula as discussed earlier. And something to note when implementing several metrics under the values section is that you can opt to hide any lines that you don't want to see. And so in this case, I only wanted to see NPS because if I unhid the promoters, detractors, and the responses, I feel that the chart would be too clogged, and that would sort of take away from what I'm actually trying to see with my data, which is most importantly the NPS score. And so as you can see in my screenshot, I have opted to hide those fields and only keep NPS, which would give me sort of a clean NPS line over time. The next example I do want to cover are complementary KPIs. So this is outside of NPS, but of course these KPIs will aid you in sort of making those right adjustments. The first example KPI are average ratings. So as I mentioned earlier, we did keep track of quality and speed of the service or product or service. And as you can see there, I did put a number beside the quality or the speed or the attribute in general. I did gather the average rating. So for quality, I do see a 4.75 average. And then the charts directly below each aspect are a count of each stars. And so as I can see here, speed is slightly lower than quality. So perhaps when making adjustments, it will be a little bit faster. That brings me to my next step or my next recommendation is always a feedback table. What you can do with this is just construct a table, show each customer feedback, and as well as the corresponding score. And to sort of spice things up here, I did apply conditional formatting. So if the response was a 9 or a 10, formatted as a green background, 7s or 8s, a gray, and of course 6 and below would be a red, which I don't have on my screenshot, but nonetheless, it is still possible. And so that will allow you to sort of seek out, maybe if you want to see only the good responses, the color will definitely help with that. And as well as especially the bad responses, that red will definitely stand out. And, that will allow you to sort of, drill down on those bad responses much quicker and allowing you to just sort of take in that feedback. And last but not least, put it all together. So, with those 3 examples created previously, just combine them together on one dashboard. Of course, format it according to your taste, and you would have yourself an NPS dashboard. And something I didn't really get to talk about was the date filters on the top right. Of course, those are calendar drop-down widgets, and what that will allow me to do is drill down to a specific time frame, whether I wanted to do like half the year or maybe the current month. The option, at least I have that option, and I can do so whenever I wish to. But of course, if you do implement a date filter or as well as any other categorical filters, you will need to implement those filters onto your widgets. And so in conclusion, promoter score, abbreviated by NPS, is a metric that tracks performance from the customer's perspective. With NPS, you can scale your business by making the necessary adjustments according to customer feedback. And with that customer feedback, ClicData offers the visualization tools to effectively report NPS and the complementary KPIs. And should you have any questions or concerns with NPS moving forward, don't hesitate to contact us at support@clickdata.com. And so that
Awesome.
concludes today's presentation. I'd like to open the floor for any questions.
Hey, awesome, Christian. That was really great. Thanks a lot for talking about NPS. And just for everyone as well, I think NPS is a great tool to understand operationally how your business is doing over time, get a feedback on a unified scale from your customers, because a lot of surveys range from 0 to 5. You can get answers to a lot of questions, but over time, it becomes difficult to understand if your particular process or if your organization is doing good or it's not doing good. And NPS provides that single KPI that you can utilize over time to understand how well your organization is doing and if you are moving in the right direction or if your customers are not happy with what are happening. Christian, I do have a few questions from our users. The first question is related to what you were talking about in PS. Um, how frequently should you end up doing an NPS analysis for your organization? Is there a best practice that you know of that people should follow?
It depends on the business itself or the product. There are cases where businesses conduct that question after every transaction, or maybe sometimes, maybe a service like ClicData here, we could do it in batches. And so there are plenty of ways to go about it, depending on what the best rollout plan is. It really just depends on your business itself.
Wait, and I think other than that as well, like as it depends on your businesses, when you're creating an NPS, especially when you're creating those questions, I think you have to pay attention to what kind of questions you end up creating. Those questions need to be able to put your survey respondents in a score of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 based on what kind of scaling you end up using. But you should be able to easily identify the promoters, detractors, and the passive responders when you are conducting this NPS score. On at ClicData, we do it for our support process and also for our product to understand if we are improving on the product, if we're doing well on the support side. In our business, we think that doing it every 6 months is a great way of keeping a track of how well we're doing in certain processes. But I think in terms of product, we end up doing it once a year. We can evaluate a customer once a year and understand how well we're doing from a product standpoint. So going back to what Christian said, it depends on your business, but good practice could be doing it between 3 to 6 months. The second question, Christian, is around, I think this borderlines between a process and also a technical question. Like if you are conducting a survey and if your survey responses change over time, or if a specific respondent today who is giving a scale of 9 now changes that answer to 6, how would you handle that?
Right.
What are the ways on ClicData to handle it?
And so what I would, this is more of a technical question, but with ClicData, when you import that data, you should have a unique identifier per respondent. And what that allows you to do, or with that data, you can create a primary key in that schema. And so when a primary key is set, you will have the option to update and append that data. And so that ensures that that respondent or that particular person does not show up twice on your survey response. And so that will automatically, with the update and append, it will locate that particular instance in the past and update it according to the new ratings from that respondent.
Makes sense. Thanks a lot, Christian. We do have a few other questions, but considering we're running out of time for the webinar, we're going to take those questions offline. We're going to reach out to you guys individually and reply back to those questions that we couldn't get to. Thanks a lot for watching the webinar today. We are going to have the webinar uploaded onto YouTube. We will be sending an email to everyone who has signed up with the link on where you can access the video. If you have any questions, you could reach out to the support team at support@clicdata.com. If you need to reach out our sales team to know more about the product, feel free to reach them out at sales@clicdata.com. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining in. Thank you, Christian. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.